Regular meeting for Tangipahoa Parish Rural Fire Protection District Number 2 for November the 25th, 2000.
Public hearing.
Oh, excuse me. Public hearing for Rural Fire Protection District Number 2 for November the 25th. We have one item on the public hearing. No, excuse me, two. First one is adoption of amended operating budget for the year ending December 31st, 2019. Any questions? And the other one is adoption of proposed operating budget for the year ending December 31st, 2020.
Mr. President and board members, as you remember, the October meeting, we introduced the proposed budget for 2020 and the amended budget. Both of those were advertised on November the 7th in our official journal. So the purpose of this public hearing is to allow the public an opportunity to participate in the budget process.
And I also want to make note that these, the copy of the budget was sent out to all of the fire departments. They've had them in their hands for 30 days. Dennis, did you have anyone call you about anything with the budget?
I have not.
And what about you, Dennis James?
No, sir.
Okay. That's what we need. Okay. Regular meeting of Tangipahoa Parish Rural Fire Protection District 2 for the November 25th, 2019 will come to order. Secretary, call roll, please.
Mr. Forrest? Here. Mr. Bailey? Here. Mr. Joseph? Present. Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Richtel? Here. Mr. Mayhew? Mr. Wells? Mr. Vial?
Yes.
Mr. Levine?
Yes.
Mr. Cortez?
Okay, public input. Anyone wish to address any agenda items? Okay. Adoption of minutes of regular meeting dated October the 28th, 2019. Motion by Mr. Joseph, second by Mr. Vial. All in favor? All opposed? Okay, motion passes. First item is Independence Fire Matter, ratification of part-time employee.
Oh, yes, sir. The chief had submitted his paperwork. Everything is in order. It's for 4 part-time positions at $10 per hour.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Also moved.
Motion by Mr. Vial, second by Mr. Joseph. Roll call.
Mr. Forrest? Yes. Mr. Bailey? Yes. Mr. Joseph? Yes. Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Richtel?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew?
Yes.
Mr. Wells? Mr. Vial?
Yes.
Mr. Levine? Mr. Cortez?
Yes.
Motion passes. You should have a copy of your monthly reports and register on your iPad. Next will be Administrator's Report, appointment of committee for event policy. This is what we talked about last meeting about the policy on the vehicles, on riding on the vehicles and stuff. I'd like to ask if anybody would like to volunteer to serve on that committee. We just need to come up with some policies and procedures on what we're going to do as far as the use of parish vehicles as far as individuals other than fire department personnel riding on our vehicles. So does anybody want to serve on that committee? If not, I'll appoint.
I think it sounds like you're appointing.
Well, it looks like it. Lewis or Lionel, one of y'all wouldn't mind?
I'll serve.
Okay, we got Lewis. Mr. Richtel? Yeah. Okay. Mr. Mayhew or Mr. Vial, don't all jump up at one time.
I'll serve.
Okay. All right, so it'd be Mr. Joseph, Mr. Richtel, and Mr. Vial. If y'all would, Dennis, if you'll get with them and maybe y'all can set up some time to meet. Probably could do it on a Wednesday or something like that, or maybe before the next meeting.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Number 3, approval of physical agent for the fire department.
Fiscal agent.
Yes, sir, Mr. President and council members. Our current fiscal agency contract, which is our banking contract, expires on December the 31st. I think we've been well pleased with the services that have been provided by our fiscal agent bank, which is First Guarantee Bank. They provided us with an 2-year extension to the existing contract for your consideration. The interest rate is a little bit less than it was on our original contract, but I think that just reflects what's happening in the financial markets now with interest rates declining a little bit. But I recommend that you consider ratifying this 2-year extension to the existing contract.
Okay. We have a motion? Sure.
So will we be locked into that interest rate for
2 years, since the 2-year contract?
Well, it's indexed, it's 100% on a 90-day T-bill rate. So as that rate fluctuates up and down, each month they give us credit for rising rates or declining rates.
All right, so I also moved then.
Motion by Mr. Wells,
Second here.
second by Mr. Vial, to approve First Guarantee Bank as the physical agent for the next 2 years for rural fire protection number 2. Roll call?
Mr. Forrest?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey? Yes. Mr. Joseph? Yes. Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Ritchell?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew? Yes. Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Vial?
Yes.
Mr. Levine? Mr. Cortez?
Okay, motion passes. Number 4, adoption of amended operating budget for the year ending December 31st, 2019. You have a motion?
Thanks, sir.
Motion by Mr. Joseph. Second by Mr., is that Mayhew? Okay. Roll call?
Mr. Forrest?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey? Yes. Mr. Joseph? Yes. Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Ritchell? Mr. Mayhew?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Vial?
Yes.
Mr. Levine? Mr. Cortez?
Yes.
Okay, motion passed.
Just one, I
Excuse
want
me.
to address one thing, if you would. As far as the increase in revenues for 2019, what was the number again? Was it 150? 150,000, I think? Over originally budgeted?
The original budget we had for 2019 was $5.4 million. We're projecting that the tax revenues for the 2020 budget to be roughly $5.7 million. About a $300,000 increase based on
That's
the
good.
assessment that was provided by the
Very good.
Tangipahoa Parish assessment.
Okay, number 5, adoption of proposed operating budget for the year ending December 31st, 2020. I have a motion? Got it. By Mr. Joseph.
Second.
Second by Mr. Forrest. Roll call?
Mr. Forrest?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey? Yes. Mr. Joseph? Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Ritchell?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew? Yes. Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Vial?
Yes.
Mr. Levine? Mr. Cortez?
Motion passes. Other fire matters? Yes, sir.
President, I have one matter I'd like to add to the agenda with your permission. We have to add to our policies and procedures manual a disaster recovery and business continuity policy. This is a recommendation from the Louisiana Legislative Auditor. It just addresses what we will do as a fire district should we unfortunately be the victim of a malware attack or something like that. I spoke with our fire administrator. I think this is a great starting point where we might also visit with our fire chiefs to find out what type of system they have in place at their local station. So if you'd like to add it to the agenda, I've got a draft policy I'd like to
I think
pass
we
out.
really do need to.
Also move.
Okay, we got a motion by Mr. Vial.
Second.
Second by Mr. Cortez to add to the agenda discussion of our policy on malware and cyber security. Roll call.
Mr. Forrest?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey? Yes. Mr. Joseph? Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Ritchell?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew? Mr. Wells?
Yes.
Mr. Vial?
Yes.
Mr. Levine? Mr. Cortez?
Yes.
Okay.
And I could just make, what this policy basically does, it addresses the financial operations of the fire district, and it talks about how our current data is secured, what backups are done, how frequently they're done, how we test those backups to make sure they're accurate. It doesn't really address operational issues, which I think is probably going to be the next step. Like I said, this is a starting point. I think the topic is very timely right now with what's been happening recently. And I'd like to encourage Dennis Crocker to maybe take this initial start and maybe spend some time this coming year on what do we have in place for our operational situation so that any particular fire station becomes the victim of one of these attacks. Do we have procedures in place where we can work around that and restore services in a timely?
Dennis, do you recommend us maybe looking at contracting with a company to have backup systems for, I know yours is probably backed up through, but like our records here and the records that, I don't know what the policy is of the fire departments as an individual, but maybe we could come up with a group that we could have, you know, one company that would monitor all of them, and we'd have a backup system for, because I know some of them are doing payroll and keeping it on a computer, So they're gonna lose all of that information if they're hacked, you know?
And Mr. President, it's not just losing information. A lot of the fire stations have very, very confidential information, and if their systems get hacked and dates of birth and social security numbers and other relevant personal information gets out in the public domain, I think, this is one of those situations where I don't think the fire district has the requisite expertise in-house to do a proper study and evaluation. So it might be prudent for the board to consider bringing in a third-party consultant just to do an initial evaluation of what we have, and then based on what they come back, we can decide what we want to do at that point. But
Can we do that under a professional service
Yes, sir.
contract? Okay. All right, well, I don't know what the board's opinion is, huh? Well, we gotta make a motion on this, for sure.
This is just going to adopt this, and it's going to be part of our overall policies. And I think we, as a project, we can work on this a little bit next year and trying to fine tune it. We want to get something in place because our auditor is going to test our procedures, and if we don't have this in place, it'll be a finding in this year's audit. So we want to go ahead and get something in place, and we can refine it as we move along into next year.
Before we vote on this, is it the consensus of the board that we maybe let Dennis get out some quotes or get out some stuff on this cyberware stuff and see if we can get some people that may want to look at what we have and give us some direction to go with this?
I'm agreeable.
My thought process is, what's administration?
Well, I think the administration has their own in-house person, don't
We
they?
have, well, like, my computer is run through the parish system, so it is protected through the parish. But what we're talking about is the fire stations, the
Yeah.
different fire departments, and have them
They
protected.
all have individual computers.
But we may, I see.
So I'm supportive. I'm just curious. Any idea cost-wise?
I think my recommendation would be to get 3 competing proposals, and we'll see what they come back with and that type of thing. But,
I just ballpark.
the financial matters are easy. It's the operational matters.
Okay.
If for some reason our
I have no
communication
problem.
system would go down, how do we restore service?
Dennis, why don't we, after the first of the year, we start looking at getting some proposals? And maybe we can include Dennis, if he wouldn't mind, that he can basically tell them what we need to do protection for.
Sure.
And that would give us a little better to write up a proposal to put out to get some quotes on it. Okay?
Not a problem.
All right, do we have a motion to accept this document into our policies and procedures?
Yes.
Second here.
Okay, motion by Mr. Joseph, second by
Yeah.
You second it, Wells? Okay. Motion by Joseph, second by Wells, to include our disaster recovery business continuity policy into our financial log. Roll call?
Mr. Forrest?
Yes.
Mr. Bailey? Mr. Joseph? Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Ridgell?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew? Mr. Wells? Mr. Vial?
Yes.
Mr. Levine? Mr. Cortez?
Okay, any other fire matters?
I do have one more. I know I sent out an email last week advising everybody about a suspicious purchase that was done at Home Depot. We did come to a conclusion on this. First off, I want to thank Home Depot for notifying us of a suspicious purchase that was done. And what I did, the minute I got the email, I started making phone calls, and I called every fire chief in the district to make sure to see if they made this purchase. Well, come to find out that they didn't, so I proceeded and went to Home Depot, got with their manager, looked at the videotape. It was a person that I did not recognize. We did file a police report. And we did close the account. We had to close the account, and they were reissuing new cards. Well, Tuesday, I got a phone call from the Hammond PD, and I want to congratulate them and thank them for their quick work. But what it turned out to be was a total misunderstanding. The school board acts as, they have a different purchasing system than ours. We actually have a credit card. They use a purchase ordering system that they just have to provide a name and a purchase order number. So when the cashier, typed in Tangipahoa Parish, Fire District came up first, and that's where she clicked it.
Wow.
And then it clicked on one of the chiefs, Chief Bankston. He's alphabetically, he's the first chief, so it went to his credit card. So The school board, I did talk to Mr. Janko. They did resolve their part. They're going to be more careful. I did speak to Home Depot about, having been a little more careful on that. They have reversed the charges out of our account. So we are not on the hook for that. But we did have to get new credit cards in the meantime, and I'm waiting for those to come in.
Sounds good, Dennis.
Okay. Any other?
That's it.
All right, we need a motion to accept the administrator's report.
So move.
Motion by Mr. Bial. Second by Mr. Joseph. Roll call.
Mr. Forrest? Yes. Mr. Bailey? Yes. Mr. Joseph? Yes. Mr. Bruno?
Yes.
Mr. Ridgel?
Yes.
Mr. Mayhew?
Yes.
Mr. Wells?
Yeah.
Mr. Vial?
Yes.
Mr. Levine? Mr. Cortez?
All right, and then I'll exercise Mr. Wells's motion.
Wait, before we that, I have a council.
Oh, Lord, wait a minute, go ahead.
I'd just like to thank Rhonda for doing
Oh, yeah,
the job that you're doing. I really appreciate it.
very good.
Now I'll make my motion. That we'll adjourn.
All right, motion by Mr. Wells, second by Mr. Joseph, all in favor?